1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Oh, I miss you. I've missed you so much.
11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Wait, where was I?
Okay, I went back and forth debating with myself. I mean, as much as I could debate against myself under quarantine without anyone else about this topic. Because this is a bit touchy. I know it's kind of weird considering that in a lot of other countries they're sort of living in a post religion world. Um, Malaysia is not exactly that. And Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, but I come from a Christian family, Catholic to be precise. Um, but in general, because well, the majority are Muslims, then other religions are also relatively conservative in some sense, and people do want to project themselves through religion, and they do use that as a form of identity. I've already spoken about something that's quite unpopular in the past video, so um, I don't know if this is my YouTube career suicide to talk about another heavy topic, which at the same time it does feel like a low hanging fruit in the Anglosphere or even in the English speaking world in Malaysia in itself. But I'm just gonna go ahead anyway because it is still a topic that needs to be dealt with in this country. Now, the thing about Malaysia is that we have something like the Pledge of Allegiance, and it's called Rukun Negara. And Rukun Negara is basically something that you recite um, during your school assemblies. And the first line in Rukun Negara, I kid you not, is kepercayaan kepada Tuhan, which is basically to believe in God. So to say that you are an atheist in Malaysia, even though you may not be a Muslim and you might not subscribe to the religion of the majority, would still draw some kind of attention. Even in urban areas, like um, atheists are not perceived to be as Malaysian as other religious groups and so on. So I can imagine people judging my Malaysianness at this point, despite the fact that I have my Malaysian passport next to me and I carry it all the time because people tend to assume that I'm Filipino for some reason. But anyway, talking about my background, I grew up Catholic. Um, my dad grew up in a Catholic household. His family was Catholic. He was born into Catholicism. Um, it's not like they were recent converts or anything. Like that's basically his life, and that's his culture too. My mom had a different story. Before that, my mom's family were sort of like pagan slash ancestor worship kind of thing, and so on. Um, whatever Chinese folk belief, I guess, to some extent. And my mom became an Anglican, despite the fact that she went to Catholic school, and after that she went to boarding school and so on. Um, my mom then converted into Catholicism when she married my dad, and I was born into the culture and religion itself, and I grew up like that. But then when I reached the age of 14 and 15, I started having doubts, which was relatively young in comparison to my other atheist friends. Um, that, but it all started because I think it was on a school trip to a college that no longer exists in my hometown. I'm not gonna mention the college, by the way. But at that college itself, they had like a Buddhist club, and they gave out like this book of sayings from Buddha. Um, and I thought it were quite interesting itself. There were a lot of values that I sort of like I could get behind of. Like I didn't believe in a lot of the things that were mentioned within it, um, especially when it comes to not on the morality side of things, but the more spiritual side of things. That well, they felt kind of weird and iffy to me. So the spiritual stuff that I found in that that booklet in general felt a bit iffy in some sense, but it did make me question because um, the morality side of things sort of like gels with whatever I believe, but why is that a religion that my family did not subscribe to? And this was like pretty heavy topics when I was 15. I was going through a lot back then. Um, and there were points where I started questioning if I agree that morality, then why is it that I'm not a believer in that religion? At the same time, when it comes to um, Sunday school, because I actively went to Sunday school and actually assisted my church on a weekly basis. I show up for mass. I didn't become an altar boy like some of my friends, but you could say that I was pretty active in Sunday school. I would be the one who gave examples and quote Deuteronomy or quote Psalm this and that and so on. And my teacher at Sunday school would use me as that example once in a while. So you could say that I was deep into that. And I hit most of the Catholic milestones at the appropriate times. Like I took my first communion at 10. I was baptized at an early age, had confirmation by the age of 14, 15. Um, you could say that is the Catholic equivalent of getting straight A's in some sense. Um, but I started questioning about all the other ritualistic stuff that people do in religion. And I look at other religions at the same time. Let's say, for example, Islam. I would think that some parts of the morality make sense and there is some kind of overlap. But why is it that I am not a believer in that religion? I don't believe in most of the rituals that they do, or I hope ritual is not too heavy of a term to be used here. Um, but then eventually, I realized that you could have morality independent of whatever actions that you want to have within that religious group in some sense. So, if that is the case, then why do I still believe in Catholicism? So, I sort of became like a deist kind of thing, like, as in, you believe that there is some kind of a God, some agnostic idea, and so on. You question the existence of God, but you detach yourself from your religion. I did become a bit edgy, listen to a lot of death metal, industrial stuff within that period, punk, also grindcore within that period. So that sort of pushed me into um, questioning more stuff eventually. Um, but I did not develop this huge hatred of religion that people may have, which I will talk in a bit about misconceptions. Um, but by the time I was age 16, 17, by the time I left school, I was you could consider me an atheist by then. And I didn't believe in God because I don't think there was a necessity for me to believe in God, and I don't see any proof for a overarching deity in itself. So that's when I became an atheist. But I did go through a lot of like rough periods, had an existential crisis. Like I remember being like 14 and 15, um, when I detached myself from started to detach myself from religion. I started asking myself, well, if all of this is not true, what makes you think that the matrix isn't true, that I live in a simulation, this kind of stuff? And I remember like crying to my mom because of that. And like a 14, 15-year old boy going through the existential crisis that um, sounds like somebody might be admitted into a psychiatric ward or something at a very young age. But I'm glad I processed that um, and became who am I, and I sort of learned more about ethics and morality through that. But that's the context. from what about talk here in general. But I want to talk about the meat of the topic here today. It's mainly about misconceptions of being an atheist in Malaysia. Um, all right. So the first misconception that I have, or I've heard from a lot of people, considering that Malaysia is a relatively conservative country, and I've had people who seem to be like quite educated question this, is that number one, atheists don't believe in anything, and we are all hedonistic people without any form of morals. Now, let me preface this: not all atheists are the same. We don't think in the same way. We do not work like in a hive mind and so on, or whatever people believe in. And I know this might be weird if the Anglosphere will be watching this, because it'd be like, duh, obvious. But I don't think it is the most obvious thing in conservative Malaysia. So it's not like I don't believe in anything. It's not like atheists don't believe in anything. We do believe in morality, just like how I explained earlier that we could relate to some of the morality that exists in Buddhism, that exists in Islam, that exists in Christianity, or any other major world religion to an extent. We don't believe in them in wholesale, and or at least I don't believe in scripture in itself. Point. People may ask me, or some of you may ask me, how can I know something is morally right or morally wrong if I don't have a scripture, if I don't believe in these kind of ideas? To me, it's simple. I have a brain, I have a nervous system. Biologically, another human being is similar to me. And I know that if I were to punch them, that they will feel some kind of pain. And I know that I will go through that too. And I don't like the idea of me going through it. Even if I'm not worried about another person um, subjecting that pain towards me, I just don't like the concept of somebody going through that form of pain. So I don't want to be the person subjecting all of this. And I think that is a good basis for morality. Whatever I don't want to go through, or whatever I can imagine another person going through, I should not wish it onto another person then. Which is basically like the golden rule in most religions. Like what Jesus said, do unto your neighbors as what you want them to do unto you, in some sense. But I think it goes beyond that also. Let's also talk about when it comes to rights and so on. So a lot of people would argue that, well, they don't want to support things like homosexuality or premarital sex because that goes against the scripture and so on. For me, it's simple. As long as it doesn't harm me, why should I be the ones policing that? And if I were to, be in their position, and this is where the empathy I mentioned earlier goes beyond the concept of just the biological experience that I could understand. This is where I need to make amendments to what I could understand through my biology. Like, I may not understand fully how it means to be a trans person, but I could try to make some kind of certain analogies on how I would feel, or try to imagine if I have that same biological composition as them, like, and try to view them as some kind of human being. So a lot of people have a problem with abstract empathy, that it could only empathize with people who they share similar experiences, or experiences they could observe at that moment. There are a lot of people who all of a sudden change their views on things like abortion when their daughter, their sister, suddenly has to get an abortion and so on. So their views suddenly change. But I think eventually a lot of people would learn how to go and have learn abstract empathy and try to empathize with people who they don't share these kind of experiences with. So somebody that's distant. And this is where you start to learn how to remove people from the abstract and learn more about the experiences in some sense, and try to imagine them as their experiences being more valid in comparison. So this is where I don't require scripture, because scripture to a certain extent can be quite dogmatic, and it doesn't actually evolve according to how my perception of biology or the amendments that I make to my what I perceive is biology in some sense. And scripture was written for a different period, at least how I perceive it. And it's kind of unfair to use the standards in the past to a whole different perimeter, which is today. And this is why I don't think that I need an overarching deity to tell me how I should act in a certain way. Those things are convenient enough metrics that it could exist, but these are things that I think people need to be trained on. You need ideas of abstract empathy, understanding the concept that people go through experiences that you may like or you may not like. So, not having a god doesn't devolve into the chaos of people murdering this and that and so on, stealing because they need to and so on. But it also allows us to understand um, how other people would live. At the same time, when people say that, well, if you lack religion, this is where you probably see a world where mm, people would steal or murder. The things that um, that happens anyway, regardless, because if religion could convince you to steal or kill on their behalf, which has happened many times in the past through the Crusades or whatsoever, um, what makes you think that it will only happen when there is an absence of God or a deity? So this is where I think was kind of ridiculous in some sense. In fact, there's probably like an understanding from a lot of religious people that there are times where concepts like stealing should be a bit more flexible. Like for example, if a person is in like a really bad economic position and they were to steal bread, let's talk about Les Miserables in some sense. Um, then to a certain extent you could probably forgive them, even though it within the Ten Commandments it says that thou should not steal, because you understand the economic conditions that person is going through, and you probably understand the biological needs of that person. Some say you know how it feels like to go hungry, and these are things that are a bit more flexible. So it does shows that people can sort of understand how other people could come to the conclusion of morals and how they derive morality out of that. The second misconception that quite a number of people actually have is that atheists or people like me are in constant pain and morose because there is no God, and that somehow we are constantly sad knowing the fact that there is no afterlife, which was kind of weird because I do admit that I can be generally sad, but it's not sadness because of the lack of God or the lack of direction. It's not necessarily true. This is the part where people might find a hard time believing because um, I'm an avid listener of black metal. Sad for very different reasons. So, chemical imbalances through depression and so on, or my environment. These kind of things could make me sad or angry, or the environment that I'm in. Probably because I am not in the third misconception is that I am an atheist because I hate religion or religious people. Now, this is where there is a confusion between being an atheist and an anti-theist. So, an anti-theist, of course, I'm not going to deny, there are people who are anti-religion as a whole and they hate religion. I don't know, probably there is a traumatic reason, or they just want to be edgy, or they do think that religion is like the reason why institutions have failed, or they do think that religion is the reason why their society is backwards or left behind. Um, I can see where they're coming from. I don't necessarily agree that all religion is bad. I do think that some kind of spirituality does help some people in some sense. But for me, it's simple. I just don't see proof to religion or the existence of God. And it all boils down to how I perceive reality. Some people say that, well, you don't need to wait for proof. And this is where faith comes in. You need to take that leap of faith. Like, I'm not gonna be Indiana Jones and jump, thinking, making this calculated risk, and so on. Like I have to, in my worldview, I think I need to evaluate things according to whether they exist or not. And I remember a friend of mine once asking, and this is like really weird because this person, she was pretty educated and she was also in the same university as I was. Um, she asked me, well, how exactly um, can you come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist when you consider proof? When at the same time you can see oxygen, you can see the air that you breathe, yet you believe in the fact that you are breathing air and so on. Which to me was kind of weird because there are many ways that you can test the existence of something. And the same thing as, applies to the existence of God. And I don't think there is tangible proof for it. I'm not so sure if, even if I were to find proof of God, it would be the direct proof for the existence of the God that was taught or what another person believes in. It does not mean that your God is the one that is um, being vindicated here. For all you know, it might be some 15,000-year-old um, eldritch God that is closer to a Lovecraftian um, creature instead of the deity, the omnipotent God that you imagine instead. Now, at the same time, it's not like I don't view any value in religion. I do feel like religion has been used as a force of good in many ways. Um, I do understand that religion has been used as a call to action to process identity for a lot of people, and a lot of people are confused. Take, for example, quite a number of African Americans who rejected, the concept of whiteness that also comes with religion. So they converted into Islam, and I do think that is a positive force, knowing that they feel as if there is something that comes out of it, and it makes them a better human being, and that also like fuel the fight for civil rights. Malcolm X found some kind of solace in Sunni Islam. It's not something I actually believe in because I don't feel like there is proof, and I don't think the spirituality part is for me. But if it makes another person a good person, then it's great. Then you have like Christians who fight for the economic rights of people because they view an association between Jesus and socialism and so on. Um, this is closer towards what has happened in Europe, not towards the Protestant side of things in the United States instead. That's a whole different conundrum and question there that I'm not going to touch on today. But the point is that I am an atheist, not because I hate religion, it's mainly because of how I perceive reality, and I don't think there is enough proof for me to attach myself. But at the same time, I do understand what kind of values that people have out of religion, and I understand how people may be able to derive joy out of it, and I think that I shouldn't deprive people of that joy because I may be an atheist, but I'm not an anti-theist. Now, lastly, um, and I think this is more of a really weird misconception, um, mainly in Malaysia, that says that, well, if you're an atheist, you probably should not celebrate all the many holidays that Malaysia affords to its citizens, like Hari Raya or Christmas or Deepavali and so on. No, screw that. A lot of atheists still enjoy the cultural side of things. I'm not going to name any names, but I have friends who grew up Muslim. They no longer believe in a religion, but they still, subscribe to the concepts that comes along with Ramadan. They will probably fast because they feel as if that is a good spiritual exercise for them. They do feel like carrying on that discipline makes them well disciplined. And the values that come with fasting, you know, learning how does it feel like to be poor or not having access to the luxuries that we may have in life. These are the kind of things that there's some value to it. Or when it comes to Shawwal, the joy that people remember um, when they congregate with their families and so on. These are things that are pretty strong. And a lot of people still attach themselves to that, even though they no longer believe in religion. And I think to a certain extent that's a force for good, but they want to detach themselves from what they think would be quite prohibiting to their worldview, and they might not be able to derive joy from that. So I think we should not deny people that joy that they may want to achieve in some sense. All right. So well, turns out this has a way more wholesome ending than I initially expected, but I do hope you enjoyed that rant. But just as a recap, the common misconceptions: number one, we don't believe in anything. No, that's not true. We do believe in certain stuff, and we are able to figure out morality out of it. Number two, atheists like I am, we're in constant pain and morose. I don't think that is a true um, conclusion to be made. Um, Maybe we are sad, but not because of the lack of God or the lack of religion and so on. We do find joy in a lot of things, like explorations in the universe, like, um, animals, and the whole world in itself. Number three, that some of us are only atheists because we hate religion or religious people. Not necessarily true, because um, I can understand the utility of religion in the past, or for some people, especially when they're going through an identity crisis. Some of us just don't believe in religion because they don't see the proof, and they need the proof to do so. And if somebody is able to prove it, then um, I might convert into that religion. And just because somebody found proof, it does not mean that it's proof of your omnipotent God at the end of the day. These are like distinctions that need to be made. Um, but number four, that we should not celebrate all these other religious side of things, like all the celebrations and festivals. No, there's a reason why the word culturally Christian exists. Like, I um, love the concept of Christmas. The very fact that at the end of the year people get around, even though I think I'll be stuck um, in a hotel for this Christmas. But anyway, this whole rant, um, despite it about me being an atheist in Malaysia, is basically just a really lengthy excuse as an atheist to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.